just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We're going to take a little bit of a hiatus from the offensive side of the ball and switch to the defensive side of the ball. As we all know, we have kind of switched the mindset in terms of fantasy football as well from the offensive side to the defensive side as I've done my IUP player profiles. But let's look at the Defensive Player of the Year betting odds with what should be a very familiar kind of feel to it, as these are players that I've talked about on the show. Without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. I love all of these guys on this list, and it should be a very fun, fascinating segment. Starting off at number 5, a guy I really, really love on the Las Vegas Raiders defense that might go under people's radars in Max Crosby. Now, I know that a lot of pressure is going to be on Max Crosby because he now certainly is the best player on that Raiders defense, but I kind of feel like with that chip on his shoulder, this makes him more powerful. Max Crosby plays in a division where defensive prowess really gets rewarded, and at the end of the day, I think that no matter what, he's always going to be at the top of the list of the best defenders in the league. He had 18 sacks last year, and there's no reason to believe he can't replicate that again. When I think of pure edge rushing talent, there's no player I would rather have on my team than Max Crosby. He's always looking for ways to improve, and when I think about a kind of thin front for the Raiders, I feel like Max Crosby is becoming that leader who can emotionally charge this Raiders defense and make them one of the more underrated units in the league. And it all stems from his ability to rush the passer. So at plus 900, I think he's a kind of a savvy pick, kind of a sneaky little pick there at good value for you guys. But at the end of the day, he still might be held back by that defense, you know? If he can't elevate it, who knows what's going to happen. And a lot of pressure is on his shoulders. But at number 5, he could be someone who could sneak up on you should the Raiders defense overperform. But coming in at number 4 is a guy who is really a special talent. He's the better Bosa brother, in my humble opinion. And that is... Get my graphic going. Nick Bosa at plus 800. Now, much like Christian McCaffrey, where he's on the best offense, you can make the case that Nick Bosa is on the best defense. And that's a huge help as well because it opens up a lot of lanes for him. You know? And the way he's used in the system is so fascinating. On run plays, he can come off the edge, get tackles for loss. He can kind of sit back in that linebacker role, play a bit more coverage. And along with Fred Warner, who's just so intelligent, the understanding and connection between the two best players in this defense is really what makes Nick Bosa stand out in this category. Because Nick Bosa could be kind of an anomalous player in a defense that really kind of relies on his production, much like Max Crosby, but that's not the case. Every single player around him believes in their own abilities and also his. And while some guys have left from this 49ers defense, like Javon Kinlaw and others of that nature, and their top 2 safeties kind of fell to injury, I still think that at the end of the day, the fact that the 49ers defense is the best in the league really bolsters Nick Bosa's case, because the way he performs every single year, one of the most dominant defenses, really makes it really stand out. And he's always going to be in the conversation for at least 8 to 10 tackles for loss, 15 to 20 sacks, because of the way that the 49ers defense can just become so varied because of their talent. And so at plus 800, he's another guy who has a much better case than Max Crosby in terms of the team he plays for. But when I look at the top 3 guys, these are guys who are just so good in defenses that truly have this aura of identity as well. And it's not just about being the best on the best team. It's being the best in terms of your defensive prowess and how you elevate others. And Nick Bosa might be counted out against there. So in the top three, fascinating top three. 2 AFC North guys who I think you know, and 1 NFC East guy. So overall, kind of on the Eastern Seaboard for this top three. But this is perhaps the most solid top three you're going to get. And let's start off with number 3, a guy we talked about a lot, the league leader in sacks last year. A guy who's might be held back a little bit due to an addition in that linebacker core for Pittsburgh, TJ Watt. Now, in terms of Patrick Queen coming into this linebacker room, I don't necessarily think it hinders what TJ Watt is capable of. It just, might not elevate his stats as much, because both of them focus on so many different areas. TJ Watt's more of a pass rusher kind of linebacker, and Patrick Queen's kind of like manning the coverage aspect of it. But when all is said and done, it definitely makes you question how TJ Watt might be affected. They definitely have, the Pittsburgh Steelers have a defensive identity based off physicality, and ultimately I think that TJ Watt's pass rushing skills will kind of overcome Patrick Queen's sense of production. But in that defense, you have so much talent at every single level. TJ Watt also kind of seems like Nick Bosa, but in a different sense in that he's playing a position that requires him to do so many things, wear so many different hats, and now that he has a running partner to kind of alleviate that burden, certain stats that really appeal to voters might catch the eye here. And when I compare him and Nick Bosa, what I think TJ Watt has the advantage of is a lot more freedom to play outside of structure. What I mean by that is, while his role as a linebacker is recognized by him, he plays certainly like a linebacker. That now becomes a lot more advantageous now that Patrick Queen is there. A lot of possibilities open up for both of them, actually, because of what Patrick Queen can do. And so, while Nick Bosa definitely has Fred Warner to thank for his ability to gut forward, TJ Watt, now that he has a partner, whereas he didn't necessarily have one before, I think he's going to be more realized for his abilities because of that. And so that's why I think he's ranked a little bit more highly, because of the fact that he's been doing it for so many years without kind of that running mate. And now that he has one, I think his efforts are going to be more appreciated by voters. Coming in number 2 is another guy who's just as versatile at the linebacker position as these two, and kind of can have the same case where you look at him as one of those guys who also has teammates around him that can bolster him as well, but Micah Parsons certainly does feel like someone who's anomalous because of the way he moves around the Cowboys front in so many different ways. You always have to account for him. You always have to recognize that he's not always looking to rush the passer, and he's going to become more calculated. And that's the thing that I would talk about in his player profile, right? The fact that he now has the ability to be one of those guys who's not just worried about, getting to the passer all the time, but can also now focus on developing himself as a true linebacker hybrid. A guy who can get into the backfield, but also recognizes times where he can drop back in coverage. And that's what I like about Micah Parsons. His movement. He can kick inside. He can come off the edge. He can do so many different things. He can wear so many different hats. And it's not that TJ Watt and Nick Bosa don't either. It's just that they're not asked to as much. And while the Cowboys' linebacker room certainly isn't very weak, I don't necessarily think outside of Micah Parsons the best aspect of this Cowboys defense. It's the fact that the collective levels of this defense exceed expectations every single time. You have the secondary that's really good in both Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs. You have the main front in DeMarcus Lawrence and Asa Odigizua. I really love them and their production. So I think that Micah Parsons really stands out because not only is he playing in a unit that really needs him, but he's doing it in different units that might actually not need him necessarily, that might not need the help. The fact that he's getting as many sacks or even more than DeMarcus Lawrence, who's a certified edge rusher, is fascinating to behold. And it really makes him stand out over TJ Watt and Nick Bosa, who are going to have to kind of share the load. But at the end of the day, he's number 2 for a reason. Because a physical specimen named Myles Garrett exists. You can't necessarily beat this guy, man. He's just so talented at what he does. I remember, and this is a great story about Myles Garrett. I believe, when the Cleveland Browns were on Hard Knocks, it was his second year. It was the year after they went 0-16. And it definitely was a very weird feeling in that camp. But the player who fascinated me most was Myles Garrett. Because he wasn't necessarily concerned about, going winless. He was concerned as a second or third year player on improving. Every single segment he was in of that show showed a player who desired to grow. And now that he has one of the best defenses in the league behind him, he's finally being recognized as a force. A dominant force that might be immovable at certain times. He's the reason the Browns made the playoffs last year. I can say that about no other player on the Browns, maybe outside of their secondary. Myles Garrett is a catalyst. He's a game changer. When I look at this list, yeah, these guys are game wreckers too, but not to the extent that Myles Garrett essentially is kind of forced to be. He is both the Browns, if you think about it, offense and defense. Without him, the whole infrastructure of the Cleveland Browns kind of makes no sense. There's no rhyme or reason to what the Cleveland Browns are. They're an enigma without him. But because of him, their ceiling is so high because he elevates almost every aspect of what the Cleveland Browns are as a team. Because of his turnovers, the Cleveland Browns had good field position, so they didn't necessarily have to worry about their inexperienced quarterbacks outside of Joe Flacco having to drive as often as possible and get as many points as possible. Because of his sacks, he switched the field position, made field goals longer, and thus he's just a frustrating player to get around. And it all started with him willing to be new and improved every single year of his career. But that's just about do it for this segment. Coming up next, we switch to the exciting 2024 rookie class and kind of meeting out who is going to be the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year. Should be some good segments up ahead. We'll be right back after the break.